What's up, guys? Also Footballtalk here. We're entering week 2 of our divisional draft breakdowns, where we go through all 32 teams' draft classes, a division at a time, jumping back and forth between the NFC and the AFC as we move along the compass, so to speak. Already having done the northern divisions, this week it's the East, then the South and the West. Today we'll be covering the Cowboys, Giants, Eagles and Commanders, talk about every single pick they made, how they fit with the additions and subtractions that we've seen for the roster this offseason, and what the process behind it looks like. As always, we'll end the video with a ranking of the 4 draft classes against each other in terms of talent acquired, how coherent the class is, and what these teams were able to accomplish in the context of available resources and forming the team. Once again, we'll only include the actual draft capital used, which for one of these teams means using a high draft pick directly on a veteran player, and if necessary we'll mention some of the other trades that took place before the draft. Detailed draft breakdowns and much more you can find on my page, also footballtalk.com, by the way. Link for that and all my social media outlets are in the video description, so check those out later. And the timestamps for each individual team and the divisional draft ranking at the end are down below as well. But now let's talk about the NFC East, starting with the Dallas Cowboys, America's team, who lost a lot of the pieces after winning 12 games last season, such as Amari Cooper, Randy Gregory, and 2 starters on the offensive line, which are actually the positions that they addressed first here in reverse order. Going first round 24th overall Tyler Smith, offensive lineman out of Tulsa, second round 56th overall Sam Williams, edge defender Ole Miss, third round 88th overall Jalen Tolbert, the wide receiver out of South Alabama, fourth round 129th overall Jake Ferguson, tight end Wisconsin, and then 4 5th rounders Matt Veletsko, offensive tackle North Dakota, Deron Bland, cornerback Fresno State, Damone Clark, linebacker LSU, John Ridgway III, interior D lineman out of Arkansas, and finally 6th round, 193rd overall, Devin Harper, linebacker Oklahoma State. First up here with Smith, a redshirt sophomore with 2 years of starting experience at left tackle. Dude has a serious mean streak in the run game, and you see him dish out pancakes routinely, and just the tenacity that he has in that regard make up for some of the technical imperfections that he may have where the hand placement isn't right on point or something like that. He also had elite testing for the offensive tackle spot at the Combine, with great movement skills, along with an 83-inch wingspan and almost 11-inch hands. However, he's very raw technically, hands often come up with a wind-up, and he can be kind of all over the place. That erratic style led to 16 penalties against him last season, which were tied for the most in the nation, and he just has to learn how to sustain blocks better instead of just punching guys and trying to put them on the ground. I think he's best suited as a guard to mask some of the technical issues with more lateral footwork, and I think he'll slide right in on the left side for Connor Williams next to Tyron Smith, who he might eventually replace because has been struggling to stay healthy at the end of seasons, and Smith obviously has the athletic talent to take over at some point, although there's certainly a long way to go still. And then Sam Williams, who had a 12.5 sack season last year, and then a tremendous pre-draft process, dominating at the NFLPA and the senior level practices, with his combination of great burst and power off the edge to be able to convert into the long arm and stuff like that. And he legitimized that by running a 4.46 at the Combine. Does lack some ankle flexibility and the lateral agility to work tightly around blockers, and in the run game just late to recognize schemes and too often sealed away from the play. But most importantly, some of the serious off-the-field concerns that there were beforehand, which apparently had him off the board with some other teams. The Cowboys have traditionally been more generous with guys like that, let's call it that, and are just betting on the talent here, which they really needed after Randy Gregory kind of pulled the rug from underneath them, where he was already set to sign a contract, but then there was some dispute over some kind of line about the guarantees, and he signed with Denver instead. And then the third round for the Cowboys, Jalen Tolbert averaged 17 yards per catch or better in each of his 3 seasons as a starter, including 16 receptions of 20 plus yards this past season, has that ability to release cleanly versus press and the extra gear to pull away, plus then excellent hand-eye coordination down the field to make some tough catches. I wouldn't say he's the greatest separator as a route runner, as 44% of his targets versus man were contested last season, and there are also some concentration drops, along with not having faced a Power 5 opponent since 2019. So it's kind of weird how I think of Tolbert as this perfect replacement for Michael Gallup actually, when really Amari Cooper was the one being traded away. So either way, now they have 2 legitimate outside threats, I believe, for the Cowboys, and then CeeDee Lamb as that guy who can work in between the numbers and really see a high target share. Then in the 4th with Ferguson, strong filled out frame at 6'5", nearly 250 pounds, He's your prototypical Y with plenty of experience as an inline blocker, has those reliable hands and the toughness after the catch. However, he won't blow you away with great speed or super athletic moves in the open field, and he does let the ball get into his body quite a bit, which didn't necessarily lead to drops, but in the red zone especially, poor production there. That ability to just snatch the ball with bodies around him, not really there. I think he's a very similar player to what they already have in Dalton Schultz. They like to run a lot of 12 personnel, so that makes sense. And with Schultz on the franchise tag, this could be a cheaper replacement actually. So that makes some sense in terms of long-term roster planning. And so does the next move here with Valetsko, who's basically the selection that they picked up from the Amari Cooper trade, along with a swap of 6 rounders with Cleveland. Presents a very athletic frame, having got an RES of 9.9, with his weight being the only parameter on the spider chart actually slightly below the 70th percentile. He was arguably the most consistent tackle throughout Senior Bowl week. That ability to play within himself, be very consistent with his pass sets, that really stood out to me. Hitting the weight room to add core and lower body strength will be crucial for him. And you see him lean too far out in front and have his arm extend as a run block a lot of times. While being 6'7", having the lack of girth in the lower half can be a bit of a tough combination where guys are able to overpower him at times. I think he's a pretty obvious developmental option at offensive tackle, with Tyron Smith, like I already talked about, missing some time every year. Lyle Collins now in Cincinnati. I think if Tyler Smith doesn't work out, can make the transition back out to tackle after starting a year at guard, I could see Valetsko slide in there on the blind side potentially and take over at some point. But then with LaRon Bland, long muscular physique at 6'2", 200 pounds with 32-inch arms. A guy who's very physical in man coverage and trusts his athleticism, but also pretty fluid in his terms and does show great awareness as a hang defender in cover 3. There's one play on tape actually I watched a while ago where he is on one side of the field and sees a crossing route the other way, comes all the way across the field and picks it off. Unfortunately it didn't count, but just that awareness to make a great instinctual play there. Does have to do a better job of fighting off the hands, and he's more of a passive tackler, I would say. Too often you see him just play flat-footed and kind of catch receivers in off coverage, which won't really fly that way in the NFL. So he's probably going to be a number 5 or even 6 on the roster right away. But Calvin Joseph apparently has some off-the-field stuff which I'm not totally aware of. And then Anthony Brown also having some bad moments last year. Bland as his developmental, physically gifted corner makes a lot of sense here. And then Damone Clark, who was my number 4 ranked linebacker purely based on tape. A guy who's an inside thumper versus the run, but also has excellent range for that. And you see him pursue the ball relentlessly all over the field, which was backed up by a 4.57 that he ran at the combine. Has that ability to sidestep or grow through running backs in protection as one of the better blitzers in this entire class. Comparing him to Jabril Cox, who also came out of LSU a year ago and was a day 3 pick for the Cowboys, Clark doesn't have the same kind of loose hips, and he can be a little impatient with leveraging himself behind combo blocks where he ends up on the wrong side eventually. The big issue with him, of course, is the back surgery that he had late in the draft process, so that kind of scared teams off, and which was why he was available this late, because otherwise I think he should have been a second round pick. But makes some sense here. The Cowboys keep investing into the linebacker position, and eventually if I could see him and Jabril Cox once again start next to each other, which would be really cool, but it's down the line and assuming that Clark can get back to 100%, so we'll have to track that. Next we got Ridgeway, a very straightforward kind of player, incredibly strong core and lower body to only space in the run game. Almost looks like a big bowling ball in the middle at times and has some serious force with the snaps to be able to move big men backwards against the will. But not a very diverse rush arsenal, being limited to the bull rush, a push-pull and a swimmer once in a while. Only 11 total pressures and over 200 rush snaps, and a rather poor testing numbers. So probably going to be a pure rundown stopper, but they also needed that type of player, looking at all the upfield interior defensive linemen that they have there, so they add some size and ability to control the line of scrimmage here. And then finally, Devin Harper, I simply didn't study, and I don't believe he'll make the roster other than maybe being the 6th name up, and if they deal with injuries that they can bring him on for special team duties. For the class as a whole, I didn't love Tyler Smith in the first round, because to me he has such a long way to go in my opinion, but if you do put him in a guard, you mitigate some of the technical difficulties, and you see if he can develop into a replacement for Tyron Smith. Williams to me would have been a little high even without the off-field stuff, so passing on Florida State edge defender Jermaine Johnson in the first, to maybe reach on those two guys from my perspective at least, most of my favorites. Toward was a good value as a number 3 receiver, and I really like the roles all those players on day 3 can fill. I can't give them a ton of credit for picking Clark because of his situation with the back surgery, and just we don't know what it means for his future. But he filled out the roster nicely with those guys, and then I always like what Jerry Jones does in terms of not being cheap to handing out guaranteed money to undrafted free agents in order to bring them in. And they got a new kicker there and like 4 more names that'll probably make the roster. So I really like what they did once the draft was wrapped up. Not taken into account when you get to the final rankings, but just wanted to mention that real quickly. And then the second team here that we want to talk about is the New York Giants, who were set up tremendously well at the top with picks 5 and 7, and were bound to get 2 impact starters in the trenches on either side of the ball, which is exactly what they did with my top 2 players overall on the big board. But from that point on, the roller coaster kind of went down. Let me just quickly run you through them. First round, 5th overall, Kayvon Thibodeau, edge defender, Oregon. Then 7th, Evan Neal, offensive tackle, Alabama. 2nd round, 43rd overall, Wendell Robinson, wide receiver, Kentucky. 2 third-round picks, Joshua Isudu, the offensive tackle / interior O-lineman out of North Carolina, and Cordell Flott, the cornerback out of LSU. Then 2 fourth-rounders, Daniel Bellinger, tight end, San Diego State, Dane Belton, safety, Iowa, and then 3 fifth-rounders, Micah McFadden, linebacker, Indiana, DJ Davidson, interior D-lineman, Arizona State, and Marcus McKeithen, another interior O-lineman out of North Carolina. And then finally in the 6th round, 182nd overall, Darian Beavers, linebacker, Cincinnati. Top here with Thibodeau, obviously my number 1 overall prospect, like I already mentioned. That first step for him is just different to the rest of the class, I believe. Has some real pop in his hands to create car crash collisions in the run game and just create issues for the offense that way. He has that ability to create speed to power in a way that is almost second to none in this class, despite being only around the 250-pound range at this point. And he's a deadly up and under move to counter that. You look, so many people talking about how he wasn't a dominant player, but you look at the numbers, along with that 7 sacks that he last season, 41 more pressures on 290 pass rushing snaps, and you really saw him take over games like Cal in the second half and stuff like that, so I don't know how that isn't being talked about at all. He can tilt rushes towards the quarterback, but I don't think he quite has that bend to actually flatten at the top of his rush. He could be more diverse in terms of his rush arsenal and build up more of a plan throughout games. And in the run game, occasionally you'll see him lose contain, so he's going to have to be more disciplined in that regard. I get why a lot of people would prefer Hutchinson as an immediate impact player, and Thibodeau still has a long way to go technically to become a truly dominant player. But for me, the high-end talent I saw was just on a different level. I think the Giants got their new OCU in Euro Plus, and people talking about the lack of effort and stuff like that. Last season he was dealing with a bummed ankle throughout the year, which a lot of people who are in this situation, projected to be a high draft pick, wouldn't have even played with. So when you don't see him chasing full speed, when the play is going all the way away from him, it might be because the coaches actually told him to save himself to some degree. So I don't like people talking about that, having a brand already and stuff like that, which is just meatheads talking about how we should be all eat football for breakfast already. I just think that's bullshit, and to me the number 1 overall prospect, so a great pick here. And then to go right back and get my number 2 here in Evan Neal, 6'7.5", 340 pounds, but seemingly no ounce of fat on his body. We saw the picture that came out at the Combine, which was just ridiculous. That explosion of the ball that he has is real, and he has that great agility to execute really any run scheme, along with being a top-tier pass protector. You see the numbers, surrendered just 3 sacks and 24 total pressures on over 1,000 combined pass blocking snaps over his last 2 years. Tremendous movement skills to mirror any type of rusher. He does dip his head a bit and gets his weight way out in front on numerous occasions in the run game, and he can kind of get caught leaning into guys rushing up the arc on a few occasions, while missing quite a few delayed wraparound blitzes from the second level. So he's going to have to play with his eyes up and be more aware of those kind of things at the next level. But yeah, to me, he can be an all-pro level tackle on either side of the line for the next decade. So with Andrew Thomas making big strides with his move to the left side, Neal now allows them to keep him there, and eventually if you want him to take over on the left side, I can think he can do either one, and I really think this was a home run pick. But after that, it got a little weird, because in the second round, they move back 5 spots with the Falcons, pick up an early 4th round in the process, and select Wendell Robinson, who had about 1,500 yards and 7 touchdowns through 18 games as this all-purpose threat in Nebraska. And he nearly duplicated those numbers in 1 year with Kentucky, where he was more of a typical receiver, even though he was still this offensive weapon on bubble screens and jet sweeps, all different ways to put the ball in his hands, but also at times winning down the field. Forced 22 missed tackles last season, which is pretty great, that ability to just make people miss and run away from them. but he was a rather average tester across the board when you look at the combine numbers, and has a very limited catch radius at 5'8", 178 pounds, with the shortest arms in combine history at just under 28 inches. And you see that at times where he has to dive for footballs instead of being able to just rip it out of the air and run with it. And you see him tend to telegraph his route at times, so he's more so a gadget player maybe at this point than an actual savvy route runner or anything like that. I'm not totally sure if I get this, because it kind of feels like more of a replacement for last year's first rounder Kadarius Toney maybe, who there were rumors about wanting to trade him. I had Robinson just outside my top 100, and he just wasn't the best wide receiver available at this point of the draft in my opinion. Sky Moore went 11 picks later, and I really think that he does everything better than Robinson while presenting more of a physical playmaker. But then in the third, Joshua Isudu, a guy who can really pivot his hips and seal defenders on the backside of runs, frames his rush as well as a pass protector, and uses his 34-inch arms to the maximum, timing up his strikes and hitting the aiming points consistently well. He finished between the 58th and the 81st percentile in all but one of the combine events, so obviously a plus athlete, but he doesn't have a lot of pop in his hands in the run game. His weight kind of gets shifted too far to either foot as a pass protector, and has to do a better job of recognizing when he gets too tall and needs to re-anchor in that regard. He's probably going to start at left guard along with John Feliciano and Mark Lewinsky, with that ability to kick out the tackle in a pinch, but also a little early for my taste, and then certainly early Cordell Flott, cornerback LSU. I get it, he's only going to just turn 21 a couple of weeks before the upcoming season, and he showed major improvements working in the slot last season with that easy speed to carry routes vertically and great pursuit all across the field with that speed. But he's just so small, barely cracks 30-inch arms, and has absurdly tiny 80 chance at a bare 175 pounds. And you see him struggle to get off blocks and kind of be overwhelmed by big receivers at times, while not having great ball production to his name with only one career interception. He's probably going to be the starting nickel just because of the draft capital invested, and I could see him moving back to the outside, but just the track record at LSU going back to 2020, that was certainly not where he had his most success. So that's kind of why it was interesting for me. A pick that I liked a lot better, Daniel Bellinger. A versatile blocker, really latches his hands into second level defenders effectively and excels in those on-the-move blocks. He glides into his routes with good burst, clean with his releases from inline alignment, and effectively works around defenders in space. However, very limited catch radius with just 76.5-inch wingspan and only had 3 contested catches last season, while also being penalized 5 times as a senior, so he's going to have to clean that up. But for a tight end room that is now led by Ricky Seals-Jones and Jordan Akins, this certainly makes some sense as more of your prototypical inline tight end. Then we get to Dane Belton, who really jumped onto the scene in 2021 as a first-team All-Big Ten selection, thanks to picking up 5 passes and breaking up another 12, along with 3 tackles for loss. A physical nickel who can also slide inside over guards at times and almost play like a weak side linebacker, so to speak, while having good size to really contest the catch point against tight ends and stuff like that. However, he did miss 15.7% of his tackling attempts last season and only landed up as a deep safety for about 6% of the snaps, but also being allowed to play pretty aggressively as this overhang defender almost, not having to decipher route patterns and stuff like that. So this was confusing to me in combination with the flop pick. Not that I don't like Belton as a player, even if this was rather early for me, I would say, but now you have 2 primary slot receivers. I understand that safety depth was needed, but we just didn't see him play deep a whole lot, so maybe more so in the box and like I said as a big nickel, but maybe not the type of player that I envisioned them taking in terms of a safety position. Michael McFadden is a really fun one to watch, has that downhill mentality as a run defender, which led to 15.5 tackles for loss last season. He can cover pretty good ground in zone coverage and was heavily utilized as a blitzer, where he has that suddenness to work across the face of blockers but also power through them when needed. You see him slip off a bunch of tackles from the side unfortunately, where he gets airborne, and his deployment in coverage was pretty limited with simple spot drops, so maybe more so a pressure play on passing downs, and it's not going to stay on there if you ask your linebackers play a lot of man against backs and stuff like that maybe. With McFadden's love for contact, the all-out effort and speed, he should be a special teams ace right away in the league, and I could actually see him start at some point just because of his smarts for the position and the leadership that he brings to the table. Then DJ Davidson, similar to the Cowboys actually, in this range as well, a very straightforward kind of nose tackle type, 6'3.5", 325 pounds, operates from a wide base with good balance and body control to own his space, and has pretty good lateral agility with his zone concepts to not get sealed off on the backside, but also rushing the passer with his eyes up, not just blindly pushing by his back and not knowing where the quarterback is. Unfortunately, pretty much a one-trick pony in that regard at this point, gradually just riding blockers backwards, and he'll already turn 25 a couple of weeks into the upcoming NFL season. Still, as an early down player behind Dexter Lawrence, I think this makes some sense. Add some depth here. Then they go back to the UNC offensive line with McKeithen, a guy who can create some big lanes in his own run game, and displays good patience to sit back in his pass sets with a wide base and tight punch as this massive 6'6.5", 340-pound guy with 35.5-inch arms. Certainly more of a waistbander and plays too tall altogether, where the NFL pass rushers will be able to expose that more routinely, and you see him slip off too many blocks in the run game as well already. So just another depth piece on the O-line probably here, who at least has a tackle length, even though I believe he's a guard only. And then finally Darren Beavers, a top 10 linebacker prospect for me, and I thought we'd see him go in the middle rounds actually, because he's this 6'4", 255-pound guy with great length, better movement skills than you'd expect for that size, and with versatility as a pressure player. We saw him come off the edge quite a bit and can kind of line up all over the place, has the power to move guys backwards. He does get his eyes trapped in the backfield at times and follows false keys, and it doesn't look like he's actually processing information coverage post-snap, so once again maybe more so coming forward and passing downs. I think he'll at worst be a special team standout and hybrid piece in passing downs to Wink Martindale to utilize in a bunch of different ways, and I think he'll have fun working with him. So like I mentioned at the top, this draft started extremely well with two studs on either side of the line, but then I didn't really get what they did from trying to build a comprehensive plan. I thought they didn't get great value, and legitimately only one guy they picked outside the top 7 will probably start for them this year. So you never want to have that, and there are some reports about the Giants taking on the notes from the former staff there, which is odd and would explain some stuff here, but I just thought there was more meat left on the bone, even if it may not matter if those two guys at the top really hit, but just what they did after that. They had a chance. After they won, I called them the biggest winners, and they just didn't follow up on it in my opinion. But next up we got the Philadelphia Eagles, and for people who only casually follow the NFL draft, it may be surprising to see them only make one pick in the first round, considering they own 3 picks between 15 and 18 altogether until the start of April still. However, they traded one of those to New Orleans at good value for a third rounder, a future first and second, and then they used the latter one of the bunch on a proven commodity, which I'll get to in a minute here. But quickly the picks here: first round, 13th overall, Jordan Davis, interior D lineman out of Georgia. Then they traded the 18th pick along with 101 for AJ Brown, the stud wide receiver from Tennessee Titans formerly. Second round, 51st overall, Cam Jurgens, interior O-lineman, Nebraska. Third round, 83rd overall, Nakobe Dean, linebacker, Georgia. And then 2 6th-rounders, Kyron Johnson, edge/linebacker, Kansas, and Grant Calcaterra, the tight end at SMU. The first move that the Eagles made on Thursday of the draft was move up a couple of spots with the Texans in order to jump the Ravens, who were largely connected to Jordan Davis, and get their guy in the middle for the future on defense, who was one of the top 2 players on that historic Bulldog defense last season. And with him, really the difference in motor last year I thought was tremendous, where a lot of times I thought he was a little late off the ball and just didn't play super hard. And last season that completely changed around, which made him a first-team All-American. Has that ability to just bench press blockers and throw them to the side of the ball carrier approaches, make a lot of stops near or behind the line of scrimmage. And he had a combine performance for the ages, obviously, which is where people really started to talk about him again. 4.78 in the 40. That might just be the most ridiculous thing that I've ever seen, but also elite jumps. So you project him to, at some point, be an impact pass rusher as well, not just be a 2-down player like a lot of people thought. He did only play 47% of the defensive snaps last season, and conditioning at his size will be a major question mark. I don't think he quite lives up to that athleticism as a pass rusher yet. It's kind of a slow burner in that regard at this point. They do have Javon Hargrave there, and Fletcher Cox was brought back on a 1-year deal, but this guy can really create some plays on the opposite side of the line of scrimmage. And I believe we'll see the Eagles rotate their bodies through a lot to keep him fresh and playing his dominant self, so I really love that move. And then they trade the 18th pick along with 101 for AJ Brown, like I already talked about. One of the true young superstars at the wide receiver position. Extremely physical player, that ability on crossing routes, catch the ball and turning into long gains, as well as down the field, win through contact. I don't have to talk too much about Brown. He's a proven commodity in my opinion, and they immediately got him a contract, which I thought was fair value in terms of his projection as a player, has been dealing with some injuries, but other than that, I don't think there's much to talk about here. Already has a great relationship with Jalen Hurts, and he gives them the true number one, which moves everybody else back one spot in the pecking order and puts them in their best positions to succeed. Then in the second round, Cam Jurgens, a really fun center prospect who has his own line of beef jerky. I think he's going to be a favorite in Philly down the line. Snap-to-step quickness is off the charts, has elite mobility for the center position where you can run wide zone, you can use him as a pull-out to the edge in the screen game, running 20-30 yards down the field. It's pretty special to watch him in that regard. And then in the pass game, held opponents to just 1 sack and 20 total pressures over the course of over 600 pass blocking snaps these last 2 years combined. I'm not going to uproot guys in gap schemes necessarily, and as good as he is, he can be a little overzealous working up to defenders in space. While in passing downs, has to get in front of guys, tends to oversell defenders, line up directly in the gap at times, and make it easy for them to work across his face. But I think the plan here is clear for the Eagles as the long-term replacement for Jason Kelce at the pivot, which is a really cool story, how he was involved in that pick. And I believe there won't be much of a drop-off when they make the switch a year from now probably. So I really love what he brings. And he allows them to stay versatile with the run schemes that they want to incorporate there. Then third round, Nakobe Dean, who could be the steal of the draft, was the play caller and captain of this outstanding Georgia defense, which everybody listened to when he was talking. Dude just flies around the field, tremendous closing speed, and really tough to pick up as a blitzer, which made him, I think he actually led that group in sacks, which is kind of crazy because they had the number 1, 13, 22, and 28th overall pick, and this was the guy at the linebacker spot who was really cleaning up for them. Just an incredible ability to work around blocks, see things happen, and just arrive there before anybody else can. His big issue is the lack of length, coming in just short of 6 feet with sub 32-inch arms, and of course the medical history with reports about his shoulders and knees being banged up, potentially needing surgery. Now they're talking about how he's not going to have surgery, even though he should have for the season. It's all kind of weird. So there must be something going on with all this injury stuff, because otherwise, even with the length concerns, there's no way that Dean should have fallen this far. And I really believe if he works out, can be the linebacker that they've been needing there in Philadelphia for a long time, and could be the steal of the draft, like I already said. Then the 2 6th-rounders, Kyron Johnson, offers an intriguing skill set as a Sam linebacker on base downs, who can drop down to the outside edge of tight ends, and that ability to contribute as a speed rusher off the edge and passing downs. 4.4 flat speed, great pass rush production at Kansas, and has that ferocious pursuit all across the field, which is kind of crazy for a guy playing in the front 7 to be able to chase down wide receivers at times, 40 yards downfield and stuff like that. He'll probably be a hybrid outside linebacker at the next level, but he only spent 3 snaps off the ball in 2021 according to Pro Football Focus. He also only has 31.5-inch arms and is very small, around 230 pounds. He does play bigger than that size would indicate, but to me he'll be a special teams demon and sub-package specialist probably. And then finally Calcaterra, who started his career at Oklahoma and was a productive player for them right away, retired from football for a while due to multiple concussions before returning to SMU. Basically a big slot receiver with tremendous ball tracking skills and hands, plus he's a pretty good positional blocker I'd say, if you put him in the slot and just let him stock block for swing screens and all kinds of stuff like that. The physicality is just an element that is mostly missing from his game. Last season he only forced 2 missed tackles and had a 36.4% contested catch rate, while also receiving a run blocking rate below 50 from PFF last season. I like Jack Stoll as an undrafted free agent out of Nebraska last year, but Calcaterra gives them another big-bodied receiving option in the slot behind Dallas Goedert. So if you include the A.J. Brown trade, which you kind of have to when a pick is directly used on a player, this was one of the best drafts overall because they got a top 10 prospect for me, a superstar receiver, a long-term replacement at center with a very similar skill set, potentially the steal of the draft like I mentioned with Dean, who could be the best linebacker for Philly in a long time, without having to invest into a position which Harry Roseman, the general manager there, has refused to do during his time, and then 2 more situational players on day 3 with upside. Maybe they could have board to where they had a couple more darts to throw later in the draft, but that's about my critique for them. If they end up with 4 impact starters from this class in 2023, and you have 2 more first round picks next year, just in case you do want to make a move at the quarterback position, that's about as good as it gets for them. And then finally we get to the Washington Commanders, and they were the team to kick off all the trade action that would follow, moving back 5 spots to New Orleans in exchange for picks 98 and 120, which was interesting because the Saints came up for a wide receiver only for them to move back to the 16th spot and select Jahan Dotson, the wide receiver as well, out of Penn State. Then second round, 47th overall, for Darren Mathis, the interior D lineman out of Alabama. Going right back to Alabama, third round, 98th overall, Brian Robinson Jr., the running back. Fourth round, Percy Butler, safety, Louisiana. 2 fifth round picks, Sam Howell, quarterback, North Carolina, and Cole Turner, tight end, Nevada. And then 2 seventh round picks, Chris Paul, interior O-lineman out of Tulsa, and Christian Holmes, the cornerback out of Oklahoma State. First up with Dotson here, they get a guy who threatens vertically on almost every single route he runs, with the way that he comes off the ball, and then he can create separation with the way that defenders have to overrun the break point, which is why he was contested just 4 times on the 31 targets against man coverage last season. And along with that, he made some of the most acrobatic, tough catches you will ever find over these last couple of years. So certainly a fun player at Penn State who produced despite having really lackluster quarterback play. However, he's only 5'10 and a half, 180 pounds soaking wet, and can really struggle to play through contact. You see it at times not challenged a whole lot, but when guys had the athletic ability to stay with him and force him to play through contact, he had his issues. And while I like the way that he runs with his pads over his knees, you see him stumble or slip too much for my taste. He has won on the outside and shown the ability to defeat press at times, but he's not the type of receiver that I thought Washington was going to target to complement Terry McLaurin as a primary slot probably. Then in the second round they get Mathis, and really how many damn Alabama defensive tackles can you really still go for? When you look at Mathis, his stats skyrocketed in 2021 with 10.5 tackles for loss and 9 sacks. He's an immovable object when he locks out and then can pull guys off himself in the run game, as well as being able in passing downs to create some push up the middle, better juice off the snap than you'd expect, and working in a lot of interior twists, really good at setting those up, and can be an asset in terms of your rush packages, all the games that you want to set up front. He's a very linear athlete, I would say. There's not much to critique in terms of what he was assigned to do, but it's also not super exciting either in terms of lateral quicks or flexibility to ever be a true impact pass rusher. They did recently resign Jonathan Allen, but Deron Payne is on his 5th-year option, so I kind of get that. I don't mind the value. He's just going to be a backup, even though they rotate their bodies through a lot probably, but the upside probably is a little bit limited here. And then they'll go right back to the Alabama well with Brian Robinson, who's a no-nonsense north-south runner who builds up momentum and routinely goes through people, but also had the 3rd most missed tackles forced among draft-eligible running backs last season at 79, and he hauled in 35 passes, so has contributed in that area, while arguably being the best pass protector in this entire class, just smacking guys in the face and stonewalling blitzers. He can't really make defenders miss in tight spaces, and when he has to stop his feet, he's much easier to bring to the ground, while also not being super creative in the open field and kind of lacking the quick twitch as a route runner to create separation, option routes and stuff like that. This certainly puts Antonio Gibson on notice because Washington was able to bring back J.D. McKissick as their 3rd down back, and Robinson being a more natural, true runner compared to Gibson, who is a converted wide receiver, because some people might have forgotten that. And that could really create a committed situation, I believe, in Washington. Then on day 3, Percy Butler has that 4.36 speed to raise angles towards the sideline, working from depth, and shows no regard for his body with the way he's throwing himself around. This guy can legitimately play high in the post and make plays outside the numbers as a single high free safety. And at the East-West Shrine practices, the guy who organizes it all there, Eric Galco, actually talked about him being the number 1 special teamer in this class with the production that he's had covering kicks, that ability to just shoot up the field and make stops for minimal yardage. Butler's missed tackle rate did double last season at just over 20%. He just needs to learn to break down in space. Also gets his eyes trapped in the backfield at times. And he didn't face many legitimate passing offenses, so that's going to be a big change for him going to the NFL. Washington's defense by far was at their best last season with 3 safeties on the field at the same time, and they decided to let Landon Collins walk. Not sure who they'll put in the slot where Collins was mostly, and that was his best time in Washington actually playing in that role. But they want those guys deep to be able to drive down from those 2 high looks, so Butler is a perfect fit for that. Then Sam Howell, a guy who made a name for himself right away as a freshman in North Carolina. For his free season with the Tar Heels, he totaled 86 big-time throws, which is the most of any quarterback in the 22 NFL draft class, and he was one of the most lethal deep ball throwers in the country throughout his time there, before losing a lot of pieces around him last year actually, and taking over as a runner, where he's pretty quick on his feet and tough at the end of those runs, which led to him going for over 800 yards and 11 touchdowns on the ground. He has a way over the top throwing motion, and can be inconsistent with his delivery, I believe, because his shoulders a lot of times are parallel to line of scrimmage almost. And in that offense, it was all go balls and RPOs. So the middle of the field, in terms of a dropback perspective, nearly inaccessible for him at times. I was much lower on Howell than consensus draft media, but even for me, 5th round was shocking. And I think it's worth a gamble just to see what he can do in a Scott Turner offense that is very vertically oriented, and he does have a lot of talent, which makes sense in that offense. Then Cole Turner, a guy who can really win in the intermediate area and isn't afraid of tight windows, as he came up with 17 contested catches last season. A guy who instantly turns up field after the catch and has been a beast on the goal line in terms of positioning his body, boxing out guys, and making big catches for touchdowns. Almost completely unproven as a prototypical tight end, only 74 snaps in line and passing downs last season, and he kind of tends to round off his breaks a lot, so not somebody who's just gonna explode, stick that foot in the ground, and run away from people. To me, he's a Mike Gesicki light almost, as this clever route runner, and I think he can carve out a role alongside Logan Thomas and John Bates there. Then we have Chris Paul, not the NBA playoff joker, but the Tulsa offensive lineman, who saw starting action across 4 spots on the O-line over 30 career games, can just mash guys into the middle time and time again as a run blocker, and has that hefty lower body, while also using his hands in independent fashion to get it done in the pass game, where he was starting at right tackle for Tulsa. This dude, however, is almost shaped like a pear, I thought, and I don't think he has the feet to play a tackle. There's a lot of belly-to-belly blocking going on with him, so looking at the rest of the roster, I don't think he'll be on the active one right away, but his positional flexibility will get him elevated at some point and maybe stick on the roster long term. And then Christian Holmes, I simply didn't study, but I know that he has pretty good size and athletic traits, other than running in the 4.5s. Because he lacked that back corner, I could see him making it through roster cuts, be a guy who's on the practice squad throughout the season. Altogether, I thought the first 2 picks were a bit uninspiring, and Dodson I'd classify as a reach, but I really like what they did in the 100s, finding potential starters in multiple spots who could really pay off down the line, with avoiding having to pay some of the veterans that they have there, like Antonio Gibson, Logan Thomas, one of the safeties, and maybe even a quarterback. If Sam Howell hits and lives up to what people praised him for as a freshman, that's a steal in the 5th round. I personally don't see him as that, but it's certainly a swing worth taking in that area, especially when you're kind of in QB purgatory for a while there, and now you brought in Carson Wentz. I think he's the savior, which he just hasn't been a couple of years, and we'll have to see how that works out. I'm not blown away by anything they did here, but they did stay close to value throughout the draft, and I could see a path for a lot of those guys helping in the roster building process down the road. And that leads us to a divisional draft rankings, where at the top I went with the Philadelphia Eagles. Just really like what they did overall, getting 2 stars on either side of the ball with Jordan Davis, and then trading for AJ Brown, a proven commodity. Like I said, they get that long-term replacement for Jason Kelsey, and a guy where there's not going to be a whole lot of drop-off. And then the Kobe Dean could be the steal of the draft, the linebacker they've been needing for such a long time, along with a couple of guys on day 3 who will add depth and help them on special teams right away. So at this point, I'm really considering betting the Eagles here to win the NFC East, because I like how they've built inside out, and they've had an excellent offseason, not just the draft, but also some of the other additions that they had, and just signing James Bradbury, the cornerback, as well. I think they really helped themselves this offseason after already being a playoff team, surprisingly to a lot of people last year. Then I got the Washington football team, not totally in love, so there is quite of a drop-off here, but I like what they did on day 3 with Sam Howell, getting him in the 5th round, which could be a steal down the road. Even though I'm certainly far from the biggest fan of him as a prospect, but just looking at the quarterback situation that they have there, a lot of guys that they brought in who maybe not going to be star players for them right away, but are going to help them, like I said, in the roster building process, fill in that spots if you have injuries, and down the line are going to help you to avoid having to pay big bucks to players and replace them with pieces that you bring in free agency and stuff like that. And they kind of needed to bring in a wide receiver, even though Jahan Dotson is 16, maybe a bit rich for my blood, but you get those pieces around Carson Wentz and see what he brings in 1 year there. Then at number 3, the Dallas Cowboys, who once again didn't love what they did with the first 2 picks. Kind of reaches for me, even though I understand that they fill in needs and have a lot of talent that they bring to the table. But it got gradually better, and even on day 3, they got a lot of value pieces who I think are going to play significant roles for them this year already and potentially down the line. Damon Clark, if he is totally coming back from the back surgery, he could be a major steal for them and eventually start at linebacker. maybe not the type of moves necessarily that keep that separation from the Eagles in the NFC East, and they're really starting to creep up like I talked about. But too often the Cowboys are pictured as these guys who just make these crazy deals on draft day when really they've been one of the better teams in that regard. And then finally the New York Giants talked about it to get my top 2 prospects on the board. I'm ready to call them the winners of this draft, and unlike the Cowboys, it gradually almost got worse. Didn't make a pick that I really loved until the final one with the Cincinnati linebacker. I have a lot of question marks with the process that was behind all of this, with the report screen out there that they didn't have their own draft notes, so to speak, with the new regime and had to take on a lot of the stuff from the guys that were already there. Once again, if those top 2 are really star players, we're not going to criticize them beyond this year, but for now, as I'm just looking at my draft grades, comparing them to the guys they got, and just the process behind it, how they approach this draft, didn't love it necessarily. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and let a couple of friends know who would like this kind of in-depth content, especially now during the true off-season, where there's really a lot of just unnecessary content out there that nobody really cares about. Now the schedule is released as well. We'll switch conferences once again later this week and look at the AFC East. Once again, the link to my page for Footballtalk.com for even more detailed breakdowns is in the video description, as well as my social media handles, which you can also see on the screen right now. Hope to see you next week again, and that you follow along with the series. So until then, see you later. Peace!